columnists, reporters, analysts in our business. He's Fox Sports' Bruce Feldman, back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Bruce?
Doing well, Rich. How are you?
I'm disgusted by the latest with Ken Starr. I mean, I just played it and reviewed it for all my listeners and viewers on this show. It's disgusting. He clearly either didn't know anything about it and is covering up for it, or was lying after he was telling the truth that he did get an email from somebody with a subject heading that they were raped. The whole thing is disgusting, Bruce, and I give you the floor.
It is. I mean, it really is pathetic when you see how he handled it. You can't trust anything about him. And I think when you look at this in the way his PR person, Mary Spaeth, and this is a very dubious PR firm out of Texas. I don't know if people remember this, but when Craig James had all of his issues a few years ago, Spaeth Communications was the one managing how he dealt with it. And now you see how duplicitous this looked with how she comes on camera and Ken Starr's smiling and he's like all over the place. And it's a joke. I mean, it really is the fact that, we're talking about sexual assaults and, he's like, well, I got many emails that come in. I'm sorry. It's just nothing about Ken Starr and how Baylor handled this passed the smell test.
So Baylor's the one that's allowing him to go out, allowing him to be the face of this thing? I know he's the face of the university that has stepped down, but who's in charge now at Baylor?
Who knows? I mean, if I'm a Baylor alum or have any connection to Baylor, I am embarrassed that he is still considered part of their, law school in any capacity. I know he has tenure. It's just, just go away. I mean, it's embarrassing. And from even a PR standpoint, they fire Art Briles a week ago yesterday. This story keeps unfolding in all kinds of awkward and embarrassing directions. First, there was his interview a couple of days ago where he contradicts himself and he seems utterly clueless. I know, I had an interview, I was told, that was lined up with him in the afternoon. Then they called me back at the end of the day and said, sorry, he's really spent, he can't do it, and there would be no interview. And now it's this. I mean, it's just, it's a joke, and it makes you sit there and go, this guy was at one point one of the most powerful people and prosecutors in the country. And if you watch that clip, or whatever, 2 or 3 minute clip, you're like, it was like seeing behind the curtain. I mean, there is no there with this guy. I mean, it's embarrassing. It really was. When I watched it, he looks pathetic there.
So why won't Baylor put out the whole report? Because that's the only move to make now. And whatever sensitivities there are with identities that need to be protected, let's do what needs to be done on that front, and then get everything out there.
Do you really believe, after seeing that this was the face of the university, and they were going to keep him on at one point? Remember, I was on their teleconference after the findings of facts that Pepper Hamilton and the Baylor board put out. I was on that teleconference, and they were basically talking, well, he's not the president, he's only going to be the chancellor and dealing with an external role. Yeah, you'll accept him to go out and try to raise money for you. You're comfortable enough to have that guy still part of your orbit. I don't have, how can anybody have faith that Baylor's going to, quote, do the right thing and do that, because who knows what else and who else could be implicated, and to what degree is there. I think they're probably also afraid of even giving lawyers and potential lawsuits and more victims to come forward and to say, look, here's the roadmap. This is why we're complicit, and they feel like they would probably put them at more legal risk. I mean, beyond that, I don't know why they wouldn't do it. Just because if you're telling us, you've had all these wrongdoing, and it's just mind-boggling that this went on in this day and age to this degree with this university. And quite honestly, it's bigger than Art Briles. It started right at the top with Ken Starr, and everybody got a window into that in that video right there.
Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports here on the Rich Eisen Show. How much are we in the media to blame about this thing not coming to light sooner? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Look, I cover college football. I felt like in the last couple of weeks, I had my eyes more open to it. But the truth is, there are very few places in this day and age that have the resources to commit to doing investigative reporting and to stay on a story. It's one thing to jump in and start, spending a week or two. It's another thing to spend 8 or 9 months on it. I work at a place now that we don't have that. We don't have the commitment or the resources to do it. And whether that's more of an excuse than an explanation, it's a reality. I credit Texas Monthly for getting involved, early on with the Sam Ukwachu case and kind of leading this. And then I give a lot of credit to Outside the Lines and the people, who work with Bob Lee for what they have done, staying on it and staying at it, because ultimately their work staying on, I think, is when this story kind of hit a boiling point and people were like, oh my God, this is really going on to this degree. And I think that's what drew it, because the local media, and look, what I think was also missed in this to some degree is the local law enforcement seems like it was complicit or really did a horrible job in handling this. And I think that because there was nobody locally in the media kind of checking to see police records or checking in to see, hey, this guy was indicted or any of this, a lot of this stuff was missed. So it all kind of came out almost at one point, and at that point it really was damning, and the whole thing just kind of reeks, and there's a lot of blame to go around all over.
Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports joining me here. And then just when you think maybe, just maybe, other institutions around the country will look at Baylor and try and glean lessons or avoid troubled prospects and recruits and not give them the proverbial second or third chance, if you will, and bringing them onto campus. You know where I'm going with this. Mississippi State yesterday. Mississippi State goes ahead and brings on a defensive end prospect named Jeffrey Simmons, who came to light earlier this year.
There was a video that went viral where he is seen pummeling a woman on the ground, throwing a flurry of punches. And, at one point, this is the part that is maddening, is the athletic director. This happens literally a week after Art Briles gets fired at Baylor. And he says, and this is a quote from him in his statement, however, it's important that Jeffrey and other potential MSU students understand that these type of actions and poor decisions are not acceptable. His words was not acceptable. You know what they did to him? They let him in, and they're going to sit him out for one game, the opener against South Alabama, which, by the way, is one of the worst programs in FBS football. That's what you're saying is not acceptable. I mean,
But so they accept him onto their campus while saying something that's not acceptable. How does something like this fly?
They have no punishment on it.
Well,
one game?
Well, why wouldn't the SEC, why wouldn't some sort of governing body step in and say, no, I understand you could admit I guess you could admit kids and their second and third opportunities. And what do you say at one point that it was 5 seconds in somebody's life, and somebody pointed out that within 5 seconds you can end somebody's life?
Exactly.
That was part of the exchange between the media.
It's ridiculous. By the way, also the timing of this stinks too, because this went on during this announcement happened at the end of SEC meetings down in Florida. They waited to release this until the day after Dan Mullen, the head coach, was left town and went back to Mississippi. So Dan Mullen didn't have to address this in a group setting. He kind of moved on. Now, I know he's probably spoken to some local reporters, but it's embarrassing. Even the wording in the beginning of the release, I mean, again, anybody who watches this video will be disgusted by it. The way they couched it was in an effort to break up a domestic fight between his sister and another adult woman. He used physical force against one of the women. Physical force, no. He pummeled this woman on the ground, and it's a shameful, and I wrote about this, it's just shameful how Scott Strickland, that's the AD, how he handled this and how Mississippi State handled it. And we've got to be better. I mean, we just, and I don't think in college football, there's a liability and a risk that's, that is now out there. And if this guy, and let's not call him a kid, he's almost 19 years old, Jeffrey Simmons. If something else happens at Mississippi State, really bad to another student involving Jeffrey Simmons, it's all on Scott Strickland, the AD, and Dan Mullen, because this just happened right after Baylor. You gotta know better, and it's completely tone deaf, and they're just seems like they've learned nothing from Baylor.
Well, Nick Saban said this week in the whole argument about satellite camps that the sport needs a commissioner And obviously, without somebody like that, it's called the NCAA. So my last question for you is, what can the NCAA do about this? Or is there some form of appetite that if you admit somebody who's got a misdemeanor of a certain sort or a felony of a certain sort into your campus and onto your team, and they go ahead and do something again, that it means you lose a year? Like, seriously, like, bring down the hammer.
The NCAA is so undermanned to try to get in and weed through these things. I mean, where your better bet would have been, the SEC passed a rule last year that they weren't not going to accept transfers who have had, issues like this. And then they said, okay, well, they were going to expand it. My question to them would have been, why not have accept anybody? And they've tried to, Greg Sankey, the commissioner, has tried to make a distinction. Well, because at one point he called youthful indiscretion. Again, this Jeffrey Simmons is almost 19 years old. I mean, he's a man at this, in the law's eyes. And beyond that, if you can say, well, he wasn't around in a campus setting before, so it's almost like he wasn't, I don't know what the inference on that really is intended to be. But you take some junior college kid, I'm not sure how much structure some of those places have compared to some high schools either. I mean, you can parse it however you want to parse it. Greg Sankey and the commissioners of these conferences, I think, have to hold their schools more accountable, because the underlying message that Mississippi State was sending is, well, if we don't take him, we let him go, somebody else is going to take him. And that's not good enough, because that's basically like throwing up your hands going, well, everybody does it. You know what? That's not good enough. Somebody has to make a statement. And right now, Mississippi State's statement was, you know what? I know we're saying it's not acceptable, but clearly it is, because we're doing nothing about it.
Bruce, thanks again. Great stuff, as always, from you and your writing and appearing on the show. Come in. You're local. Come in. You're local next time.
I will. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Appreciate it. That's Bruce Feldman.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.